Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tiana. If you are new to my channel, welcome, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. On today's video, we are doing part 2 of John Wayne Gacy, the Killer Clown. Again, this is going to be a long video. It is very sensitive. Parts of it are very graphic, so if you are sensitive to that, I would be cautious. And again, I'm sorry if I mispronounce any of the names. So without further ado, let's jump into this video because it's a long one. Because last time we covered basically his upbringing and his first sexual encounters and his sexual abuses and the first few murders. The rest of this is gonna be a lot. So, and again, I am looking down here because my notes are down here. They're on my laptop. So, on October 24th of 1976, Gacy abducted two teenage friends named Kenneth Parker and Michael Marino. So, Michael Marino, he is one to keep in mind because there have been several questions as whether he was Michael Marino, which further on I will explain everything, but for right now, we're gonna keep on going. So on October 24th, 1976, Gacy abducted and killed two teenage friends named Kenneth Parker and Michael Marino. The two boys were last seen outside of a restaurant on Clark Street. Both boys were strangled and buried in the same grave and in the same crawl space. 2 days later, a 19-year-old employee of PDM contractors named William Bundy disappeared after informing his family he was to attend a party. Bundy was also strangled and buried under Gacy's master bedroom. In December 1976, another PDM employee, 17-year-old Gregory Godzik, disappeared. He was last seen by his girlfriend outside her house after he had driven her home after a date. He had only worked for PDM contractors for 3 weeks before his disappearance. In the time he had worked for Gacy, he had informed his family Gacy had him dig trenches for some kind of drain tiles in his crawl space. So remember, PDM Contractors is the company that Gacy created. So that was his company. His car was later found in Niles. His parents and older sister contacted Gacy about Greg's disappearance. Gacy claimed to the family that Greg had run away from home. Remember, this has happened several times. Several families have contacted Gacy or had someone contact Gacy, and every single time he always said, "Oh, I'm sorry, they ran away." So having indicated to Gacy before his disappearance that he wished to do so. So apparently, Greg had told Gacy that he wanted to run away. Gacy claimed to have received a message on an answering machine from Gregory. Gacy said that he erased it though. A month later, January 20th, 1977, John Zick, a 19-year-old acquaintance of John Butkovich, Gregory Godzik, and Gacy, also disappeared. So remember, John Butkovich and Gregory Godzik were also people that he murdered. Zick was lured to Gacy's house because he was supposed to be selling Gacy his Plymouth Satellite. He was buried above Godzik. A ring that Zick wore with his initials was kept on Gacy's dresser. Gacy also kept Zick's portable Motorola TV in his bedroom and later sold the used car to Michael Rossi. Remember, Michael Rossi was Gacy's, roommate, and he also worked for PDM Contractors. Between 1976 and March 1977, Gacy is known to have killed an unidentified young man around the age of 25. An inscription upon a key fob among the personal artifacts buried with this unknown victim suggests that his first name may have been Greg or Gregory. His body was buried in a crawlspace beneath the body of 20-year-old John Prestige, a Michigan man that was in Chicago to visit friends, whom Gacy killed on March 15. After the murder of Prestige, Gacy is believed to have murdered one further unidentified young man exhumed from his crawlspace. Although the timing of this particular young man's murder is inconclusive, the young man was buried parallel to the wall of Gacy's crawlspace directly beneath to his home. The two victims were murdered on the same day, May 1976, where they were buried alongside this young man. Yet sequential burial patterns of three victims murdered on 1977 leave an equal possibility this particular victim may have been murdered in the spring or in the summer of 1977. All that is known about this young man is that he was 17 to 21 years of age and that he had fractured his left collarbone before his disappearance. In March 1977, Gacy was hired by a construction company that had him traveling. The company had him, the company hired him, but he still owned PDM contractors. In April 1977, Michael Rossi moved out. That same month, Gacy was temporarily engaged to a woman he was dating for 3 months, and she moved into the home. Shortly after, the engagement was called off in June, and she moved out. The following month, July, Gacy killed 19-year-old Matthew Bowman. He was buried in a crawlspace with the tourniquet used to strangle him still knotted around his neck. In 1977, a clue emerged on the disappearance of John Zick. Michael Rossi was arrested for stealing gas from a gas station while he was driving the car. Remember, Michael Rossi ended up with the Plymouth Satellite. That was John Zick's. The attendant noted the license plate number, and the police traced the car to Gacy. Gacy just told the police that Zick had sold him the car because he was looking to leave town and he needed the money. The police didn't look any further into it, but they did inform Zick's parents that Gacy sold their son's car. In late 1977, Gacy began dating Carol Hoff, which is his ex-wife again, in hopes of reconciliation, but nothing really came of it. By the end of 1977, Gacy was also known to have murdered an additional 6 young men between the ages of 16 and 21. The first victim was Robert Gilroy. He was last seen alive September 12, 1977. He was the son of a Chicago police sergeant. He was suffocated and buried in the crawlspace. On September 12, Gacy flew to Pittsburgh to supervise a remodeling project and did not return to Chicago until the 16th. Remember, he had the other job that he was, the other construction job that was making him travel. So since it is known that Gacy was in another state at the time that the young man was last seen, it is possible that Gacy did not act alone in some of the murders. So 10 days after Gilroy was last seen, a 19-year-old U.S. Marine, John Mowry, disappeared after leaving his mother's house to walk to his apartment. Mowry was strangled to death and buried in the northwest corner of the crawlspace, perpendicular to the body of William Bundy. On October 17, 1977, 21-year-old Russell Nelson of Minnesota disappeared. He was last seen outside a Chicago bar. Russell died of suffocation and was buried in the crawlspace. Less than 4 weeks later, 16-year-old Kalamazoo boy named Robert Winch was murdered and buried in the crawl space. November 18th, 1977, a 20-year-old father of one, Tommy Bowling, disappeared after leaving a Chicago bar. Both Winch and Bowling were strangled to death, and they were both buried in the crawl space beneath the hallway. 3 weeks after Tommy Bowling was murdered, on December 9th, 1977, a 19-year-old U.S. Marine, David Talsma, disappeared after informing his mother that he was going to a rock concert in Hammond. Talsma was strangled with a ligature and buried in the crawl space. December 30th, 1977, Gacy abducted 19-year-old student named Robert Donnelly from a Chicago bus stop at gunpoint. Gacy drove Donnelly home with him, raped him, tortured him with various devices, and repeatedly dunked his head into a tub of water until he passed out, and then revived him. Donnelly later testified at Gacy's trial that he was in such pain that he asked Gacy to kill him. "Get it over with," Gacy replied. "I'm getting around to it." After hours of torture, Gacy drove Donnelly to his place of work, removed the handcuffs, and released him. Donnelly reported the assault, and Gacy was questioned January 8, 1978. He admitted to having had slave sex with Donnelly, but insisted that everything was consensual. The police believed him, and no charges were filed. The following month, on February 16, 1978, William Kendrick disappeared after telling his fiancée he was to spend the evening at the bar. Kindred was the final victim to be buried in Gacy's crawl space, and Gacy began to dispose of his victims in the Des Plaines River. In March 1928, Gacy lured 26-year-old Jeffrey Rignall into his car. He was chloroformed and driven to the house on Summerdale, where he was raped, tortured with various instruments including lit candles and whips, and repeatedly chloroformed until unconsciousness. Rignall was driven to Lincoln Park, where he was dumped unconscious but alive. He made it to his girlfriend's apartment. He was later informed that the chloroform had damaged his liver permanently. Police were informed of the assault but did not investigate Gacy. Rignall was able to recall, through the chloroform haze of the night, Gacy's distinctive black Oldsmobile, the Kennedy Expressway, and particular side street. Police issued an arrest warrant, and Gacy was arrested on July 15th. He was facing an impending trial for battery charge for the Rignall incident when he was arrested in December for the murders. So, that's like foreseeing, okay? Remember that. So Gacy later confessed to the police that he thought of putting bodies in the attic, but he figured that the excessive leakage would be an issue. Therefore, he chose to dispose of his victim's body off the I-55 bridge into the Des Plaines River. He stated that he has thrown 5 bodies in the river in 1978. Only 4 of these bodies were found. The first victim that was found was Timothy O'Rourke, a 20-year-old, and he was killed in mid-June, leaving his apartment after telling his roommates that he was going to purchase some cigarettes. His body was found June 30th. November 4th, Gacy killed 19-year-old Frank Landingen. His body was found in the Des Plaines River on November 12th. The cause of death was suffocation. His underwear were lodged down his throat, which caused his airways to close and caused him to drown in his own vomit. Less than 3 weeks later, on November 24th, a 20-year-old from Elmwood Park named James Mazzara disappeared after having Thanksgiving with his family. His body was found December 28th. James was strangled with a ligature. On December 11th, 1978, Gacy visited Des Plaines Pharmacy to discuss potentially remodeling the store with Phil Torf, whom was the owner of the pharmacy. While he was there was a 15-year-old boy named Robert Pius. So he informed this boy that he could make $5 an hour working at PDM Contractors, which was double what he was making at the pharmacy. Once Gacy left the store, Robert told his mother that some contractor wanted to talk to him about a job. He left the pharmacy and promised he would come back. When Robert never came back, his family filed a missing persons report with the Des Plaines police. Phil Torf, which was the owner of the pharmacy, informed the police department that Gacy was the contractor that Robert most likely left the store to go talk to. When the Des Plaines police talked to Gacy at his home, he denied speaking to Robert. He told the police that there were two young men, one he believed to be Robert, and that he simply asked them if there were materials in the back for remodeling. Which, that's completely off, because, like, how do you go from, oh, you know, you wanted to give this person a job, to, oh, I was just asking for remodeling materials? That doesn't make sense. He was adamant that he never offered Robert a job, and he also promised to come to the station later that day to confirm the statement. He said that he wasn't able to do so at the moment because his uncle had just passed away. At 3:20 a.m., Gacy came to the police station, but he was covered in mud, and he said that he had just been in a traffic accident. When he was at the police station, he denied any involvement and repeated that he never offered Robert a job. The police then asked Gacy why he had returned to the pharmacy at 8 p.m. that day. Gacy stated that Phil Torf had told him that he had left his appointment book there. So, the detectives had already talked to Phil Torf, and Phil Torf stated that he never made that call to Gacy. Gacy prepared a written statement detailing his movements on December 11th. They discovered that he had an outstanding battery charge, the one that I mentioned earlier, and that he had served a prison sentence in Iowa for sodomy of a 15-year-old boy. A search of Gacy's house on December 13th was ordered by a judge at the request of the detectives. There were several suspicious items in his home. A 1975 Maine's West High School class ring with the engraved initials JAS, various driver's licenses, handcuffs, 2x4s with holes drilled in the ends, books on homosexuality and basically pedophilia, a syringe, male clothing that was way too small for Gacy, a 6mm starter pistol, a receipt from the pharmacy where Robert Price worked at. The police decided to confiscate his Oldsmobile as well as the PDM vehicles. They assigned 2-man surveillance teams to follow Gacy while they continued their investigation of Gacy regarding Robert's disappearance. The following day, investigators got a phone call from Michael Rossi, and he informed the investigators of Gregory Godsick's disappearance and the fact that another employee of PDM, Charles Hatula, had been found drowned in an Illinois river the previous year. On December 15th, Des Plaines investigators obtained further details upon Gacy's battery charge, learning that the complainant, Jeffrey Ringnall, had reported that Gacy had lured him into his car, chloroformed him, raped him, and dumped him with the severe chest and facial burns and rectal bleeding in Lincoln Park that following morning. In an interview with Gacy's former wife that same day, they learned of John Butkovich's disappearance. They also learned that the Maine's West High School ring was traced to John Allen Zick, Jas. In an interview with Zick's mother, she mentioned that on January 1977, when her son disappeared, several of his items were missing, including a Motorola TV set. She also mentioned that investigators had informed her that apparently her son had sold the Plymouth Satellite to a John Gacy, which he had sold to Michael Rossi. Investigators noted that Gacy's employee, Michael Rossi, drove a similar vehicle to Zick, which they checked the VIN number and confirmed that the car Rossi was driving around was in fact Zick's car. During the investigation, Gacy became friendly with the police officers that were surveilling him. He would take them out for meals, and he would take them out for drinks. Basically, gained he gained their trust, and he would reassure them that he was not involved in Robert's disappearance. On December 17th, investigators had a formal interview of Michael Rossi, who informed them that Gacy had sold Zick's car to him. A further examination of Gacy's Oldsmobile was conducted on this date. In the course of the examination, the trunk of the car, the investigators discovered a small cluster of fibers which may have been human hair. These fibers were sent for further analysis, and that evening officers conducted a test using 3 trained German Shepherd search dogs to determine whether Piest had been present in any of Gacy's vehicles. The dogs were allowed to examine each of Gacy's vehicles, where one of the dogs approached Gacy's Oldsmobile and he laid on the passenger seat. And that's whenever the dog's handler informed the investigators that he had given him a death reaction, indicating that Robert Piest's body was present in that vehicle. That evening, he invited 2 of the surveillance detectives for a meal. The next day, December 18th, Gacy invited those same detectives for breakfast, and he talked about business, his marriages, and his activities as a registered clown. At one point in the conversation, Gacy told one of the 2 surveillance detectives, clowns get away with murder. By December 18th, Gacy was beginning to show visible signs of strain as a result of constant surveillance. He was unshaven, he looked tired, appeared anxious, and was drinking heavily. You'll start to notice that this is a pattern with him. So that afternoon, he drove to his lawyer's office to prepare a $750,000 civil suit against Des Plaines police, demanding that they seize their surveillance. Remember, he had 2-man surveillance team at all times. A serial number of Nissan Pharmacy photo receipt found in Gacy's kitchen was traced to 17-year-old Kai Byers, a colleague of Piest and a Nissan Pharmacy employee who admitted to have put the receipt in the pocket of the jacket before Piest took the jacket. The presence of the receipt indicated that Gacy must have been in contact with Robert Piest because it was in Piest's possession. That same evening, Michael Rossi was interviewed a second time. On this occasion, Rossi was more cooperative, informing the detectives that in the summer of 1977, Gacy had him spread 10 bags of lime in the crawl space of the house. December 19th, investigators began compiling evidence for a second search warrant of Gacy's house. That same day, Gacy's lawyer filed a civil suit against Des Plaines police. The hearing of the suit was scheduled for the 22nd. One day, Gacy invited the surveillance officers into the home, and while one of them was speaking with Gacy and basically distracting him, one of the other officers tried to go into Gacy's master bedroom, and he tried to get the serial number off of the TV set, which he couldn't, but he ended up flushing the toilet. When he flushed the toilet, he got an odor of rotting corpse. So he suspected that the smell could be of a rotting corpse emanating from a heating duct. Polygraph test was conducted on Michael Rossi, and some of the responses to the questions came out inconclusive. However, upon agreeing to a visual test in which it's a map of County Cook, and it was divided into 12 grid sections numbered 1 to 12, with Gacy's home being marked for, I'm gonna mispronounce this name, Kozen Kozenczak noted an extreme response in Rossi's blood pressure when asked, "Is the body of Robert Pice buried in grid number 4?" Upon hearing this question, Rossi refused to continue the polygraph questioning, although he did discuss further his digging trenches in the crawl space and remarked upon Gacy's insistence that he not deviate from where he was instructed to dig. Cram informed investigators of Gacy's attempt to rape him in 1976 and stated that after he and Gacy returned to his home after December 13th search of his property, Gacy turned pale when he saw a lump of mud on the carpet, which he thought came from his crawl space. Cram then stated that Gacy had grabbed a flashlight and immediately entered the crawl space to look for evidence of digging. When asked whether he had been to this crawl space, Cram replied that he had been asked by Gacy to spread lime down in the crawl space. And he was also told to dug trenches and Gacy told him that the reason why he needed to dig these trenches was for plumbing. Cram then stated that these trenches were 2 feet wide, 6 feet long, and 2 feet deep, which is the size of graves. On December 20th, Gacy drove to his lawyer's office because he had an appointment. They were going to discuss the process of his civil suit. When he arrived, Gacy was very, he looked, how do I explain? He looked like he was, very, out of place, he was already, really anxious, and he was, disheveled. And so immediately, when he got there, he asked for an alcoholic beverage, which his lawyer went downstairs to the car and got him some whiskey. And whenever he came back, Gacy told him that he needed to discuss some stuff with him. So Gacy picked up a copy of the Daily Herald, and he pointed to the front page, and he said, and it was basically an article covering the disappearance of Robert Pice. And he told his lawyers, "This boy is dead. He's in the river." Throughout the morning, he began giving several confessions, and he began by informing Amarante, which is one of his lawyers, and Stevens, another one of his lawyers, that he had been the judge, jury, and the executioner of many people, most of whom he stated were buried in the crawl space, but there were others that were dumped in Des Plaines River. Some he referred to by name, and some he would call male prostitutes, hustlers, and liars, whom he would give the rope trick. And that's what he called, that's whenever he would strangle them, with whatever ligature, he would call it the rope trick and the handcuff trick. Others, he stated, would wake up and he would find a strangled kid on the floor with their hands behind their back. In reference to Robert Pice, Gacy stated that as he placed the tourniquet around his neck, Pice was crying and he was scared. As a result of the alcohol he had consumed, Gacy fell asleep midway through the confession, and Amarante immediately arranged a psychiatric appointment for Gacy at 9 a.m. the next morning. He said, "Well, I can't think about this right now. I've got things to do," ignoring that his lawyers had advised him about the psychiatric appointment. So Gacy left their office to attend business needs. Gacy later recollected his memories of his final day of freedom as being hazy, adding that he knew that his arrest was inevitable, and that in his final hours of freedom, he intended to visit his friends and give his final farewells. Upon leaving his lawyer's office, Gacy drove to a Shell gas station, where in the course of filling his rental car, he handed a small bag of cannabis to the attendant, a young man named Lance Jacobson. Jacobson immediately handed the bag to the surveillance officers, adding that Gacy told him, "The end is coming. These guys are going to kill me." Gacy then drove to the home of a fellow contractor, Ronald Road. And inside Ronald Road's home, Gacy hugged Road before bursting into tears and saying, "I killed 30 people, give or take." Gacy then left Rhodes' home to meet with Michael Rossi and David Cram. As he drove along the expressway, the surveillance officers noted that he was holding a rosary to his chin and praying while driving. After talking to Cram and Rossi at Cram's home, Cram drove Gacy to a meeting he had with Leroy Stevens, which is one of his lawyers. Cram told surveillance officers that Gacy told Rossi and himself that he had confessed to his lawyers about his 30 murders that he had committed. When the meeting was over, he had Cram drive him to Maryhill Cemetery, and that's where his father was buried. Because of how erratic he had become, surveillance officers were concerned that he was going to try to kill himself, so they arrested him on possession of marijuana. At 4:30 in the afternoon of December 21st, the eve of the hearing of Gacy's civil suit, the request for a second search warrant was granted by Judge Marvin J. Peters. Upon their arrival, officers found that Gacy had unplugged his sump pump and that the crawl space was flooded with water. To clear the water, they simply replaced the plug and waited for the water to drain. After the crawl space had drained, an evidence technician named David Genty entered the 28 by 38 foot crawl space, and he began to crawl to the southwest corner of the crawl space and began digging. Within minutes, he was able to uncover a putrefied flesh and a human arm bone. Genty immediately shouted to the investigators that they could go ahead and charge Gacy with murder. Genty added the remark, "I think this place is full of kids." He told the officer that he wanted to clear the air once he found out that the police found human remains in his crawl space. In the early hours of December 22nd, 1978, Gacy confessed to the police that since 1972, he had committed 25 to 30 murders, all of whom he falsely claimed were teenage male runaways or male prostitutes. He said that he would typically abduct from the Chicago Greyhound bus station. I mentioned that in the previous video to remember that bus station, because it's true that is mainly where he abducted people from. Or he would simply take the kids off the street. The victims would often be grabbed by force or conned into believing Gacy, often carrying a sheriff's badges and placing spotlights on his black Oldsmobile, like if he was a policeman. Others would be lured to his house with either the promise of a job with his construction company or with the offer of money for sex. Most victims were buried in Gacy's crawl space, where he would periodically pour quicklime to hasten the decomposition of the bodies. In January 1979, he had planned to further conceal the corpse by covering the entire crawl space with concrete. He is stated to have lost count of the victims. When asked about Robert Pice, Gacy confessed to strangling the young man at his house on December 11th after luring him there. He confessed to have slept next to the boy's body that evening before disposing of the corpse in the Des Plaines River. The reason he had arrived at the Des Plaines police station in a dirty and disheveled manner in the early hours of December 13th was because he had had a minor traffic accident after disposing of Pice's body. While he was actually en route to the appointment with the Des Plaines police officer. In this accident, his vehicle had slid off the ice-covered road, and he had unsuccessfully attempted to free the vehicle himself before the vehicle had to be towed from its location. He also confessed to the police that he had buried the body of John Butkovich in his garage. Gacy drew a rough diagram of his basement to show where all the bodies were buried. On December 22nd, Gacy accompanied the police officers to his house to show them the locations in the garage where he had buried Butkovich's body. The police then drove to the spot on the I-55 bridge where Gacy had thrown the bodies of Pice and 4 other victims. Only 4 out of 5 of those victims that were thrown into the Des Plaines River were ever found. Between December 22nd and the 29th of 1978, 27 bodies were recovered from Gacy's property, 26 of which were found buried in the crawl space, with one additional, John Butkovich, being found buried beneath the concrete floor of his garage. Due to severe winter snowfall in Chicago, the excavation was postponed to March. On March 9th, the body of 28th victim was found buried in the pit close to a barbecue grill in the backyard of the property. The victim was found wrapped within several plastic bags and wore a silver ring on the left hand, so investigators thought he was married. 1 week later, March 16th, the skeletal remains of another victim were found buried beneath the dining room floor, bringing the total amount in his home to be 29. Gacy's home was demolished in 1979. 3 additional bodies were found in the Des Plaines River between June and December of 1978. Several bodies found at the Gacy's property were found with plastic bags over heads or their upper torsos. Many were also found with ligatures used to strangle them still knotted around their necks. In other instances, they found cloth gags lodged way deep into the victim's throat. 12 of the victims buried beneath Gacy's property died of asphyxiation. All of the victims discovered at Gacy's property were in an advanced state of decomposition. To heavily rely on dental records to facilitate the identification of remains. On April 9th of 1979, a decomposed body was discovered entangled in exposed roots on the edge of the Des Plaines River in Grundy County. The body was identified via dental records as that being Robert Pice. A subsequent autopsy revealed that 3 wads of paper-like material had been shoved down his throat while he was alive, causing him to die of suffocation. Gacy was brought to trial on February 6, 1980, charged with 33 murders. He was tried in Cook County, Illinois, before Judge Louis Garipo. The jury was selected from Rockford because of the significant press coverage in Cook County. At the request of his defense counsel, Gacy spent over 300 hours in the year before his trial with doctors at the Menard Correctional Center. He underwent a variety of psychological tests before a panel of psychiatrists to determine whether he was mentally competent to stand trial. And his lawyers actually told him to plead insanity. Gacy had attempted to convince the doctors that he suffered from multiple personality disorder. 3 psychiatric experts appearing for the defense at Gacy's trial testified that they found Gacy to be a paranoid schizophrenic with a multiple personality disorder. The prosecutors presented a case that indicated Gacy was sane and fully competent to stand trial. They produced several witnesses to testify to the premeditation of Gacy's actions and the efforts he went to in order to escape detection. Those doctors refuted the defense doctors' claims of multiple personality and insanity. 2 witnesses who testified were PDM employees who confessed Gacy had them dig trenches in the crawl space. One of these employees was David Cram, and he testified that in August 1977, Gacy had marked a location in the crawl space with sticks and told him to dig a drainage trench. Michael Rossi testified right after Cram. Rossi pointed to the location of the remains of an unidentified victim known as Body 13. Rossi stated that he had not dug any other trenches, but at Gacy's request, he had supervised other PDM employees digging trenches in the crawl space. Both Rossi and Cram testified that Gacy would often peek into the trenches or into the crawl space to make sure that the trenches they were digging were exactly where he told them to. Gacy testified that he had only personally dug only five of the victims' graves, and after he had been arrested, that's whenever he got all of his employees to dig the rest of the trenches. And that is including Gregory Godsick. So Gregory Godsick probably dug his own grave. And Gacy actually said that this way he knew that graves would be available. February 18th, Dr. Robert Stein, the Cook County medical examiner, testified as to how he and his colleagues had to conduct the recovery of the remains. Stein testified that the excavation was conducted in an archaeological fashion, adding that all the bodies recovered were decomposed and they had putrefied, skeletalized remains. Upon cross-examination, Gacy's defense team attempted to raise the possibility that all 33 murders were accidental, erotic asphyxia deaths. Dr. Stein countered this assertion by stating that this claim was highly improbable. After the testimony of Dr. Robert Stein, Jeffrey Rignall testified on behalf of the prosecution, recounting the abuse and torture that he had endured at Gacy's hands in March of 1978. On February 29th, one of the young men that Gacy had sexually assaulted in 1967, Donald Voorhees, Donald Voorhees was the son of one of his JC friends. He testified to his ordeal at Gacy's hands and that Gacy had subsequently paid another young man to beat him and spray him with mace so that he would not testify. Donald felt that he was not able to stand to testify, but he did attempt to until he was asked to step down. Robert Donnelly testified the week after Voorhees, recounting his ordeal at Gacy's hands in December 1977. Donnelly was visibly distressed as he recollected the abuse he endured at Gacy's hands and came close to breaking down on several occasions. As Donnelly testified, Gacy repeatedly laughed at him, but Donnelly finished his testimony. One of Gacy's defense attorneys, Robert Mota, during Donnelly's cross-examination, attempted to discredit his testimony, but Donnelly did not waver from his testimony of what had occurred. During the 5th week of trial, Gacy wrote a personal letter to Judge Garripo, requesting a mistrial on a number of bases, including that he did not approve his lawyer's insanity plea approach, that his lawyers had not allowed him to take the witness stand as he had desired to do so, that his defense had not called enough witnesses, and that the police were lying about the statements. Judge Garripo addressed Gacy's letter by informing him that under the law he had the choice as to whether he wished to testify, and that he was free to indicate as much to the judge if he wished to do so. On March 11th, the final arguments from both prosecution and the defense attorneys began, with the arguments concluding on the following day. Prosecuting attorney Terry Sullivan argued first, outlining Gacy's history of abusing young men, the testimony of his efforts to avoid detection, and describing Gacy's surviving victims, Voorhees and Donnelly, as living dead. Stated, John Gacy has accounted for more human devastation than many earthly catastrophes, but one must tremble. I tremble when thinking about just how close he came to getting away with it all. And it's true because, I mean, it was 33 people that we know of. And I think it's just because he began to get lazy, honestly. After the state's 4-hour closing counsel, Sam Amirante argued for the defense. Amirante argued against the testimony delivered by the doctor who had testified for the prosecution, repeatedly citing the testimony of four psychiatrists and psychologists who had testified on behalf of the defense. Amirante also accused Sullivan of scarcely referring to the evidence presented throughout the trial in his own closing argument, and of arousing hatred against his client. The defense lawyer attempted to portray Gacy as a man driven by compulsions he was unable to control. Mirante then argued to the jury to put aside the prejudice they held against his client and requested they deliver a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, adding that the psychology of Gacy's behavior would be of a benefit to scientific research and that the psychology of his mind should be studied. On the morning of March 12th, William Kunkel continued to argue for the prosecution. Kunkel referred to the defense's contention of insanity as a sham, arguing that the facts of the case demonstrated Gacy's ability to think logically and control his actions. Very true. Kunkel also referred to the testimony of a doctor who had examined Gacy in 1968. This doctor had diagnosed Gacy with antisocial personality, capable of committing crimes without remorse. At the close of this argument, Kunkel pulled each of the 22 photos of Gacy's identified victims off a board displaying the images and asked the jury not to show sympathy but to show justice. Kunkel then asked the jury to show the same sympathy this man showed when he took their lives and put them there, before throwing the stack of photos into the opening of the trap door of Gacy's crawl space, which had been introduced as evidence and was on display in the courtroom. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours and found Gacy guilty of 33 charges of murder for which he had been brought to trial. He was also found guilty for sexual assault, taking indecent liberties with a child, both convictions in reference to Robert Pice. The following day, both the prosecution and the defense made alternative pleas for the sentence the jury should decide. The prosecution requesting a death sentence for each murder committed after the Illinois statute on capital punishment came into effect in June 1977, the defense requesting life imprisonment. The jury deliberated for more than 2 hours before they returned with their decision in the sentencing phase of the trial. Gacy was sentenced to death for the 12 counts of murder upon which the prosecution had sought this penalty. An initial date of the execution was set for June 2nd, 1980. Once he was sentenced, Gacy was transferred to the Menard Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois, where he remained incarcerated on death row for 14 years. While he was in an isolated prison cell, Gacy began to paint, and so some of these paintings were, it basically is him depicting himself as Pogo, which was his clown. That's what he's named himself. Many of his paintings have been displayed at an exhibition, and others have been sold at various auctions. Some of them ranging from $200 and some of them $20,000. Although Gacy was permitted to earn money from the sale of his paintings until 1985, he claimed that his artwork was intended to bring joy to people's lives. On February 15, 1983, Gacy was stabbed in the arm by Henry Brisbane, a fellow death row inmate known as the I-57 Killer. At the time of his attack, Gacy had been participating in a voluntary work program when Brisbane ran towards him and stabbed him once in the upper arm with a sharpened wire. After his incarceration, Gacy read numerous law books and filed a lot of motions and appeals. Gacy's appeals related to issues such as validity of the first search warrant granted to the Des Plaines police on December 13, 1978, and his objections to his lawyer's insanity plea defense at the trial. Gacy also contended that although he held some knowledge of the 5 murders, those of McCoy, Butkovich, Gottsick, Sick, and Pice, the other 28 murders had been committed by employees who were in possession of keys to his house while he was away in business trips. So basically implying that his his employees could have committed any of these murders. In mid-1984, the Supreme Court of Illinois upheld Gacy's conviction and ordered that he be executed by lethal injection on November 14th. Gacy filed an appeal against this decision, which was denied by the Supreme Court of the United States on March 4th of 1985. The following year, Gacy filed a further post-conviction petition seeking a new trial. His then defense lawyer, Richard Kling, argued that Gacy had been provided with ineffective legal counsel at his trial in 1980. This post-conviction petition was dismissed on September 11th of 1986. The 1985 decision that he be executed was again appealed by Gacy, although his conviction was again upheld in September 29th of 1988, with the Illinois Supreme Court setting a renewed execution date of January 11th of 1989. After Gacy's final appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, was denied in October of 1993, the Illinois Supreme Court formally set an execution date for May 10, 1994. On the morning of May 9, 1994, Gacy was transferred from Menard Correctional Center to Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill to be executed. The entire procedure took about 18 minutes, and they did have several complications. The anesthesiologist blamed the lack of knowledge from the prison guards. According to public reports, Gacy was diagnosed a psychopath who did not express any remorse for his crimes. His final statement to his lawyers before his execution was that killing him would not compensate for the loss of others and that the state was murdering him. His final spoken words were, "Kiss my ass." After Gacy's death was confirmed at 12:58 a.m. on May 10, 1994, his brain was removed. It is in possession of Helen Morrison, a witness for the defense at Gacy's trial, who has interviewed Gacy and other serial killers in an attempt to isolate common personality traits of violent sociopaths. His body was cremated after the execution. In the months following Gacy's execution, many of his paintings were auctioned. Some were bought so that they could be destroyed. In June 1994, communal bonfire held in Illinois and attended by approximately 300 people, including some of the family members of the deceased. So, earlier I said that that Michael Marino might not have been Michael Marino. So, in 2012, DNA tests conducted upon remains identified as those of Michael Marino revealed that the remains had been misidentified. Marino's mother had always doubted the identification of her son because clothing found upon the body was inconsistent with what her son had worn when she last saw him. In addition to the dental x-ray conducted upon the victim, identified as Michael Marino, had revealed that the victim had all of his second molars, whereas dental x-rays conducted upon Marino in March 1976 revealed one molar had not erupted. Basically, it hadn't come out yet. Nonetheless, the orthodontist who had identified Marino's remains has stated his conviction in the accuracy of his findings, adding that he had compared 32 teeth, probably half a dozen of them had very distinct fillings, and every one of them was consistent with Michael Marino. So guys, that concludes this video. It was a very long video, but you have to keep in mind that there were 33 victims. Only 27 were identified. The rest were not. So John Wayne Gacy was a horrible man. He was terrible. And you know, after, you know, doing all this research on him, like I can't even begin to like think about like of all the people, like they were all so young. None of them were over the age of 25. And none of them like had a chance to live, to live their full life. And it just makes me so sad thinking about all these young men that could have had a future. So guys, let me know down below if you have any questions, or if you would like to see more of these videos. If you liked learning about this stuff, please let me know. I will continue to look up different things to discuss on my channel. If you have any specific serial killer that you would like me to cover, or a cult that you would like me to cover, or a missing person that you would like me to cover, just please let me know down below in the comments. Don't forget to give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for tuning in to Talking with Tiana. I'll see you later, guys.